The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected, in the sphere of learning and development, we are seeing a shift towards embracing global education from the more traditional brand. Tonight's focus will be on the importance of understanding this shift and its benefits. To share their insights, I'm pleased to welcome to the show Professor Ebrahim Adia, Vice Chancellor, University of Wolverhampton. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening.
I'm also joined by Dr. Carey, Head of International Partnerships at the University of Wolverhampton. Welcome back, Dr. Carey.
Thank you so much.
Good to have you both on the show. Professor, as the Vice Chancellor of the University of Wolverhampton, you have tens of thousands of students across the world who are beneficiaries of global education. And education cannot take place in a vacuum. Over and above academic excellence, education needs to enable cultural competence, social responsibility among students across divides, across borders, across differences. To set the stage, I'd like to ask you to share your perspectives of the power of global education.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a really interesting question, Sonali, and it's one that we think about very profoundly at the University of Wolverhampton as part of our internationalisation strategy. So since I've become the Vice-Chancellor, we have decided that we will pursue a more ambitious international strategy and therefore take out our qualifications to a much wider footprint around the world. I think you're right in terms of casting the question the way you have. The world is becoming increasingly globalised and interconnected, but at the same time, interestingly, it's becoming more fractured. You know, so as time and space is becoming compressed, what we're also seeing in parallel and paradoxically are all the old loyalties that existed in the way we kind of used to understand them between right and left being completely fractured along ethnic lines and religious lines and many other interest group lines. And in many ways, the way I think about global education to describe is something that hopefully starts to help to act as more of a glue between those kind of different communities and different interests that are creating degrees of fracture. Why do I say that? Because everything we know about education is that generally it's seen as liberating, and particularly in terms of the degree education that we provide. You know, it is based on a set of liberal social democratic underlying principles, and therefore the kind of idea that at the end of the degree we have graduates who are able to think critically, think for themselves, are able to differentiate between knowledge that is verified, has gone through very robust processes, as opposed to knowledge that's out there just in the ether, which has very little actual merit, you know, and all those things are really important in terms of empowering individuals to be able to not only navigate what's become a really complex world, and to differentiate between different information, but also to have values that are embracing, are inclusive, that are tolerant of others, you know, and that's what the university education, such as what we try to provide at the University of Wolverhampton, gives. From our perspective, of course, we also see university education as a great liberator. You know, it's interesting that my own background is that of Indian migrants. My parents came from India in the 1960s, and like all migrant communities, you know, we took our position in the UK at the bottom of the economic pecking order. My parents, my father worked in the textile mills of Greater Manchester, and the reason I sit here today as Vice Chancellor of a very important UK university, it was because of the power of university education. You know, that's been transformational for me. Without that, I would not be a Vice Chancellor today, and I'm delighted that in terms of our student body in Wolverhampton, and we have another two campuses, one in Telford, one in Walsall, over 70% of our students are first in family to go into university. In other words, their parents have no history of going to university. And therefore what we're doing essentially is helping those students to some extent break the link between the economic fortunes of their parents and their future for their families and themselves. So that's a extremely liberating process that we're able to provide. And then there's a fundamental question, well, if that's right for our students in the UK, and we have 18,000 students at any point in time, should that set of values and that mission that we have around transforming lives through creating opportunity and driving social mobility, should that not be extended around the world? And wherever we think we can take University of Wolverhampton qualifications within that economic context and deliver those, should we not? And our view is we should. You know, the opportunity for social mobility doesn't end in Wolverhampton, doesn't end in the Black Country, doesn't end in the Midlands of the UK. Indeed, you know, our view is that we should take those qualifications around the world. And the last bit I should say, of course, is that there is a very significant correlation, of course, between degree qualifications, if somebody gets a degree, and their economic fortunes. And we know that, generally speaking, graduates tend to be healthier. You know, they make choices in their lives that where, you know, which tend to result in healthier lives. We know that graduates tend to be more committed to civic opportunities and giving back to the community. And we know that where you have families and their children that are economically in a safe place, they are much less likely to be attracted to extreme ideologies, whatever those might be in any given place or given time. You know, you close that space down. So for us, for many reasons, you know, by offering, as you describe it, a global education through the vehicle of the University of Wolverhampton, we see it as the opportunity to empower, but really the opportunity for thousands of individuals around the world to be more accepting of others and to be more inclusive of others, and therefore contributing and making a positive contribution to their communities and society.
Fabulous, Professor. That was a beautiful start to this conversation. Dr. Carey, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much. I just only hope that I can come up with an answer as articulate and capable as my dear friend here.
Yes, the Professor spoke about this concept of internationalizing education. Yeah. I'd like you to reflect on these broader implications of internationalizing education beyond traditional learning. How does global education prepare students for a diverse, interconnected world?
I think what we're looking at these days is a very different world. We're looking at a Wi-Fi enabled, 5G enabled society with smart devices, and we realistically have to move with the times. And if we don't move with the times, education doesn't become relevant for the target audience. So when we are looking at international education, it's about how do we modernise it whilst keeping its traditional values, and how do we make it relevant to societies globally. For us, the international world is here. If we were to go back to my childhood, most things were local. Things were made locally, brands were local, food that we may eat was locally produced. But if I look around Colombo, I see international global brands owned by large corporations. So what we have to do is have an educational system that is reflective of the global nature of society as we know it today, but make people pedagogically aware, but also aware in terms of the values that they could have, but the opportunities that lie locally, but also internationally. The more people understand the international marketplace, the more opportunities they will have for themselves, their country and their communities.
Professor, I want to steer clear from making sweeping statements that overgeneralize, but in terms of culture, the West tends to have a more individualistic approach, whereas in the global South, we're more used to a community-based societal structure. How do you view this paradigm, and how does this feature in global education?
So yeah, that's a really interesting characterization, I think, and as you say, without generalizing, because there are always exceptions, I think there is something that is true to some extent, you know, in terms of those kind of stereotypes that you've set out. So, and the reason I say that, of course, is somebody who's from a personal background was raised in an Indian family in Greater Manchester, surrounded by lots of other Indian families, you know, and that culture of hospitality, mutual dependency, you know, is still there. It's very much kind of thriving even in the new generations, although I think my children's generation are probably not as interested in those wider community networks as my parents were. So inevitably, you know, there's a degree of dissipation. But okay, are there, you know, if you kind of think about the UK, to some extent there are some interesting collectivist values in the UK. So you think about the NHS. It's an amazing kind of socialist kind of institution that was created, where essentially people are prepared to pay national insurance. Initially it was national insurance, a form of tax in those days, and in return they decided that they would pool their health risks into an institution, so that when you fall ill you don't have to worry about money. You know, you get access at the point of use. So there are lots of those kind of public institutions that essentially are there as collectivist institutions that are there to provide a safety net, you know, to enable people to get into work, etc. I think if you move then to probably more of a community setting, then I think you're right, you know, kind of the communities are probably not the way bonding the way we might understand them to be in some South Asian cultures. You know, I think the families tend to be a bit more independent of each other, and that finds its way through into university education as well. So one of the things that many new students that come to our university fear the most is that sense that they have to become independent learners very quickly, and they don't. You know, we kind of recognise that when students come out of college, they're going to take them a while, and we've got to support them to become independent learners, but eventually we expect them to become independent learners. And the whole grading system, by and large, an assessment system, is based on individuals demonstrating that they have acquired a body of knowledge and can apply it in context, so it's very individualised. I think what's really interesting then is that when we receive students from overseas, particularly from this part of the world, you know, kind of India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, they often tend to fall foul of our academic regulations, and these, you know, most challenging regulation is that of plagiarism. You know, it is a big offence, you know, in academia to take somebody else's work, even if you're quoting them, without acknowledging that it's not your own. You know, it's kind of that bit. A lot of our students who come from this part of the world don't understand that, and they will work collectively on pieces of work and assignments, and then submit them. And then we find our academics are marking them and find that 2 or 3 pieces of work are looking quite similar, quite identical. Now that's against the regulations in the UK, you know, so we have to kind of recognise that inevitably, you know, cultures are different, and, you know, as a system we've got to make sure that we continue to support students to understand that the UK education system is different to perhaps the one that they came from. The other context then is, you know, in terms of delivering University of Wolverhampton qualification around the world, of course, you know, you start from the perspective that there is a body of knowledge there, and that's sacrosanct. You know, we get our degree awarding powers, and we design our degrees according to subject benchmarks. We're heavily regulated, and therefore that is really, really important. But of course, what we do recognise is that, of course, you know, pedagogically, different societies are different, and whereas in the UK our pedagogy has moved on, and we're moved to much more problem-based learning, kind of case study learning, much more emphasis not on somebody standing at the front just talking, imparting knowledge, but focused on group work, seminars where there is an exchange of ideas, a challenge of ideas, a scrutiny of ideas. A lot of societies out there, there is still that kind of approach to its didactic teaching, its factual recall, and just because suddenly we bring a University of Wolverhampton qualification to another part of the world, the students aren't ready necessarily to learn in a different way. If the member of staff is not standing at the front teaching them, but trying to facilitate, they might feel they're not getting their money's worth. So there inevitably has to be some degree of context within which our qualifications are delivered. The main point is, our interest is going to be our standards being maintained from a quality assurance perspective, and are the students leaving the university here, wherever it might be in the world, with the right level of skills and aptitudes and understanding as they might be in the UK. And so, but there has to be some degree of recognition on our part that in cultural context, the way in which learning will be experienced, for example, will vary from place to place, and of course we have to kind of recognise that and accommodate that.
Sure. Dr. Carey, with the rise of online and hybrid learning models, how do you see technology transforming the educational landscape globally?
Well, I think technology really intervened during the COVID period, and perhaps in many ways we were forced to do something that maybe we weren't ready for or didn't even want to do. But that COVID period gave us the need to transform with technology. So we had to move, and globally the world moved. So technology is going to become an increasing part of it, whether that's hybrid learning, whether that's online learning, because we've got a generation of people that perhaps grew up with online learning and feel more comfortable with that. I think the other key issues, as well as how we deliver, it's the other elements. We've got complete rise of AI. Now, everybody who tells me they're an expert in AI, maybe today, but they may not be next week or the week after. Things are moving so quickly, so I think we have to be very aware that technology is often moving much quicker than we have the abilities to understand it at this moment. But the key factor is that the market is moving with technology, and globally this technology is going to make us do things differently and view education very differently globally. What it does give you is a global platform. So we must use quality education on a global platform, because if we don't, influencer culture comes in, whereby it's based on opinion, it's not based on science, it's not based on fact, it's based on opinion. So we have to embrace the technology, otherwise the technology will be embraced by people whose mission is not always that of education, it's merely one of control and disinformation.
Absolutely. Professor Adia, we aren't born to pay taxes and work and die. However, capitalist structures keep us chained to a rigorous, routine way of life. It's so deeply entrenched and accepted as the norm. How do you view the power of internationalized education to inculcate in students the strength to overcome this structured, sort of templated way of life towards critical thinking, magical living?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of an interesting question in many ways, and kind of underlying within it is an ideological position there, I think, to some extent, that you have you may be alluding to. And of course, my background is public policy, and my PhD and some of my work I did was kind of around political philosophy, so inevitably I'm familiar with a range of philosophies, all the way from neoliberal philosophies of minimalist state, you know, the Hayekian view of the world, through to kind of social democratic kind of approaches, through to kind of Marxism, etc. You know, so I think your reference to capitalist structures inevitably kind of takes you down the language of Marxism, and look, you know, just you know, Marxist analysis that the inevitable logic of capitalism is its own self-destruction, because the need to drive higher profits results eventually in the proletization of the work of the people, you know, until they have nothing to lose but their chains. You know, that's kind of essentially what you're saying. You know. So how do you manage that? I mean, first of all, there's a piece around collective action. You know, so and that collective action comes most effectively through the state. You know, so it's not by accident that many states in the West recognise that unfettered capitalism is potentially extremely damaging to the environment. It's extremely damaging to the welfare of people. You know, just drive for profits at any cost. Clearly, so the fact we all live therefore within regulatory constraints, including for capitalism. You know, in terms of the fact that they can't just pollute a river. You know, because that means that they can make more profits. Or that you can't make somebody work 80 hours, you know, at almost no pay, because again, you know, that you know, and therefore you have workers' rights. You know, you have recognition of trade unions who negotiate on behalf of workers. You know, all of that is part of that kind of ecosystem where you end up with responsible capitalism, which is what, you know, we all kind of, certainly I come from the perspective actually that you know, kind of competition is a good thing, you know, but it has to be within the confines of very clear rules that apply to everybody equally. So that, now within that then, so how do you kind of take that down to the level of the individual, and you know, what does it mean for the individual? Well, first of all, it's good that the state gives individuals a degree of protection, you know, in terms of work-life balance, you know, so generally speaking, you know, in the UK, the working week is 37.5 hours or so, you know, and that is that kind of expectation that, you know, you kind of, beyond that, you then have rights to your own private time, your family time, etc. So that work-life balance is really important. Increasingly, you know, many of us as employers are moving to hybrid working. We kind of recognise the idea that people got to come in all the time, you know, to be in the office for presenteeism's sake doesn't make much sense. You know, they're spending an hour driving in, an hour driving home, which is dead time. You know, so again, you know, kind of just being sensible around these things is really important. The fact we have minimum pay legislation, you know, so everybody kind of is guaranteed minimum pay per hour. Again, that's really important because, you know, again, if you just leave it to the market, you know, and you know, you have within the market a range of employers. Some are very responsible, very sensible, but you have at the other end people who are maximising profits at anybody's cost, and you know, so all of that I think is really kind of important in terms of making sure that people have the right work-life balance. And there's another reason for that, because in the end, you know, when people have time for leisure, they have time for their families, you know, they have time to do all those nice things, actually you get more productive, happier, more effective employees, you know, so you know, you know, anybody that thinks that you should just drive employees into the ground, that's a false economy. Actually, you get less out of your employees over time. So the question then is, you know, how do we kind of ensure that in terms of what we do through global education, you know, more people who leave as graduates have that view of the world that I've just shared, you know, that one of creating a society where the rules are designed in a way where it's fair, it's inclusive, where people have challenges, disabilities, etc. There are extra protections, you know. That's about values, you know, it's about the kind of values we drive through our education, our curriculum, you know. You know, we you know, our mission is to transform lives, individually, but our mission is also to use our education to transform our communities and our societies through the power of the individual graduate. So that liberal education that we provide, you know, that focus on the importance of the environment, environmental sustainability, you know, that importance on inclusivity, treating everybody the same, that focus on the importance of those kind of fundamental principles around the rule of law, etc. You know, all of that, you know, is just kind of part of that kind of education where every year thousands of our graduates going around in the world, they have a view of the world, you know, which is the kind of view that I've just described, and we try to kind of deliver that through the way in which we design our degrees and our curriculum.
Is that there's this growth of, we have this image of capitalism whereby everybody benefits. There's this sprinkling of magic water that everybody benefits from that. And in some cases that is the case. What we've seen perhaps in the last few decades is the rise of what critics would argue was predatory capitalism, whereby it's profit for profit's sake. And I think that some of that is, we need to review that very, very significantly. It can't be right for a global tycoon to make huge amounts of redundancies amongst their staff and then insist on a $50 a year bonus. How can that be right? Because when those communities are broken because of relocating a factory from one country to another country, yes, it may be good news for inward investment, but for those people it leaves behind, that community is often destroyed by that loss of employability. So I think we do have to look at capitalism in a different way. There are some good capitalists, they certainly are, who put back to society. They're philanthropists, they've got great values, but there are others who are not. So I think we, through education, have to recognise there's two sides to that capitalist coin. And for those who are not being good to people, good to society, that are predatory, education gives people the awareness to question, the ability to be critical, because without education we're not empowered to be critical. We're there to be subservient and to accept. So when people are predatory, when they are doing bad things, education gives us and gives young people and people of all ages the opportunity to question and raise their voices. And through modern technology, whether that's social media platforms, or whether that's blogs, or whether that's through YouTube channels, they can raise their voices in a way that they may not have been able to before. But the catalyst for questioning predatory capitalism is education, and that's what we wish to achieve, and raise those questions against those people who perhaps should have questionable values.
Professor, you're in Sri Lanka to kickstart your collaboration with the Maharaja Institute of Management, offering 2 master's degrees. Both are non-traditional programs. How important is it to mainstream the arts?
Yes, Sonali, it's extremely important. As a university, we have a 200-year history. And over those 200 years, you know, we have developed an offer that spans all the major areas, you know, in terms of the broad areas. So we have courses in the arts, the humanities, the social sciences, in the sciences, in healthcare, and interestingly, we're just about to start medicine as well. So, you know, just that breadth of the portfolio is really important to us. The arts matter, you know, when you think about the way in which the arts are able to enrich our lives, you know, the way they're able to give us a view on the world that is so different, provide a lens through which we see the world that can make us actually challenge many of our own assumptions about what the world is. And, you know, that is really, really important. And I think trying to keep the arts and the courses in the arts going is really, really important. You know, particularly in the UK at the moment, where in a very marketised higher education space, you know, where decisions are made around the economics of different courses, it is very easy to look at some arts programmes, find that the numbers out there, and you know, you can start to kind of reduce your portfolio. So, you know, I think we need to constantly question ourselves around that. So from my perspective, arts are extremely important in a university setting. The other bit is, you know, we're really pleased that we're bringing those courses here to Sri Lanka. It's probably fair to say that a lot of what we already do in many countries in terms of our existing and new partnerships tends to be heavily geared towards business qualifications,
right.
management, business, health, things like nursing, IT, you know, and kind of engineering, that kind of thing. So this is one of those few opportunities where we've been able to bring some of our arts courses here, and I'm absolutely delighted that we've been able to do that.
I'm going to be very controversial.
Please.
Okay. I don't view them as arts. Okay, why do I not view them as arts? Okay, so digital marketing is a science. Why do I say that? Cost per thousand analysis, sales per thousand analysis. Which commercial copy works better? Commercial copy A, B, C, D or E. It's informatics. So whilst the front of it may be an art, the back of it is a science. It's numerical, it's mathematical. So it effectively is part of a new generation of programs that we're leading on, that is a combination of the arts, which of course you're right about that, the look and feel is of an art, the back of it is a science. With film and TV production, yes, we can look at the beautiful sets with the sun kissing sunglasses on a beautiful day in a noirist type suit. It looks wonderful, but the production element is science. So the combination of what is an art and what isn't a science is quite a debate. Of course, it's not a pure science, but the back to both of these programs is based in logic, it's based in science, but it has, shall we say, the glamour of the arts as well. So I think what we're trying to do with these very commercially focused programs is bring the best of the scientific underpinnings, but also bring the spirit and the ethos of the art. So that's probably just more at my emotional side of it, if you don't mind.
Fantastic. Dr. Carey, speak to us also about how the University of Wolverhampton is making its curricula and teaching methods adaptable to meet the unique educational and cultural needs of its Sri Lankan students.
Well, the University of Wolverhampton is in itself, even in the UK, a very multicultural university. And some people sort of view that as in a negative way. I'm very proud that we are rich in diversity. So that diversity, that richness that we have within our home campus is reflected globally. So whilst we may have the programs that we are very proud to have within Sri Lanka, we're using Sri Lankan experts to work with. We're working with subject matter which is Sri Lankan, but we're basing that on a globally international framework. So the students probably get the best of both worlds, whereby they get the underpinnings of an international education, but with the richness of the Sri Lankan environment and Sri Lankan tutors that working very closely with us. So there is no such thing as a straightforward answer, but in this case it is truly a hybrid between Sri Lanka and Wolverhampton, whereby we're working in true partnership.
Sonali, if I can add to that, it's a really helpful answer. There's a couple of things that we are developing at the moment, which applies to all our students, but equally will be of benefit to our Sri Lankan students. We have many Sri Lankan students studying in Wolverhampton at present. We're currently designing a new curriculum framework that's designed to deliver our graduate attributes. So we have developed in a graduate attributes framework. What is it to be a University of Wolverhampton graduate? You know, what are we saying to employers will be the skills that our graduates will be bringing? And one of the things that I have asked my senior leadership team to do in the academic area is to think and be very creative around the extent to which subject knowledge and the time we spend developing subject knowledge can be reduced. So the same subject knowledge, because you have to meet the learning outcomes to get the degree, but can that be delivered in 80% of the time, for example? Because what I'm really interested in is to see how we create space in the curriculum to develop all the other skills that are really going to matter in people's personal and professional lives. So what are the kind of things we're talking about here? We're talking about emotional intelligence. We're talking about the ability to collaborate. We're talking about the ability to lead and know when not to lead and be part of a team when somebody else is leading. Confidence in using digital software, etc. An awareness of AI and how it's going to affect them. Awareness of the environment, environmental sustainability. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to weave in a whole set of skills that we think our graduates require to be successful, in addition just to the subject knowledge. Degrees got to be more than subject knowledge. So from our perspective, I think, if you're a Sri Lankan student, in the next 2-3 years when you graduate, you will be an engineer, you will be a cyber security expert, you will be a health worker, a nurse, you might be able to even make films, but alongside that, what we expect is that you've got all those softer skills, the communication skills, all the things that really matter in terms of helping you navigate your world professionally. So that's really important. The other thing we're also doing is increasingly working on the basis that we want to personalise the student journey, because I'm really keen that we move away from broad student categories of if you come from a certain kind of background, you have certain characteristics, then inevitably this is how you learn. So I want to really move away from that, to really start to treat each student as an individual, because each student brings their own life experiences, their own biography, their own mental structures in terms of how they learn, their preferred learning style, how they might want to be assessed. And what we've got to do is try and design a learning journey over 3 years which is right for that individual student, and to create support structures so when they need some extra advice, guidance, skills, study skills, help with an assignment, they might have they might have problems. Students have problems. Sometimes they might have financial problems, sometimes things might happen in their personal lives and they have a mental health crisis. All that's got to be personalised, delivered at the right time when the student needs it. And again, that applies to all our students, but our Sri Lankan students will benefit from that personalisation of the journey as much as they will from a redesigned curriculum framework.
Thank you. Dr. Carey, with the advent of AI, rapidly growing technology, how does innovation fit into this equation of education? What skills do you believe are becoming more and more essential for graduates entering the global job market? And how is your university geared to face that?
I think it's Professor Adia just said. I think it's those soft skills that are becoming increasingly important. The ability to work as a team, the ability to accept the opinions of others, the ability to think globally, not locally, the ability to take strengths from different team members. So whilst this whole AI thing will have a profound effect, the soft skills required are still going to be vitally important. So when we're embodying a university and innovation, the innovation isn't just about technology, it's about the innovation in soft skills that individuals have. And trying to give young people and students of all ages those skills so they become good team players, they become good listeners, they become good individuals who understand ethically what's required and ecologically what's required. So whilst AI will have a profound effect, those pillars are going to be more and more important to get those basics right. And that's what we're trying to embody within the curriculum, not just within the UK, but globally.
All right. Professor, we are in a world at war. What is the intersectionality between education and empathy?
Okay. That's an interesting one, Sonali. Yeah, I mean, you're right. You know, we are in a extremely turbulent period in human history, and I think in the fullness of time, when we look back at this period, you know, it will be one which will be characterised, you know, with levels of insecurity, personal insecurity in many cases, you know, given the kind of economic changes that we're all seeing around us, and political instability in so many different parts of the world. I mean, without a doubt, if everything I've talked about in terms of University of Wolverhampton degree programmes and the fact that they are underpinned by a set of values that are very dear to the university, you know, the values of inclusion, the values of compassion, then you would expect that, you know, if that finds its way into the way our graduates think, then inevitably we will have people who leave our university with a level of empathy and understanding of why empathy is important, you know, because the alternative to empathy, you know, the alternative to tolerance, the alternative to inclusion, the alternative to discussion and negotiation, and being prepared to listen to somebody and disagree with them in an agreeable way, you know, it's scary, you know, and therefore, you know, these things are really important to us. And whenever I do my graduation speech, I kind of talk about the fact that as individuals now, you know, you are empowered, each one, you know, to make a positive difference to your communities, to society, and go out there and do that, you know. So empathy is a really important part of that.
If I may just add,
yeah, please.
I think that the world has always been at war, and there's always a war someplace in the world, and the current situation between Russia and Ukraine, my wife and I have a Ukrainian mum with her 2 children living with us as fleed refugees from Ukraine, and it really hit home because the mum, called Tanya, she was pregnant when she came with us, and we watched that appalling bombing of a maternity hospital whereby a mum was giving birth, and both the mum and the baby died. My wife and I looked at each other and said, we can help with this. So we brought up a pregnant mum and her then 5-year-old son to live with us, and they still will live with us. So you're right, the world is at war, but the world has always been at war. But I think as human beings, it's important not just to say things, but to do things. And education is really important because for those perpetrators of aggression and violence, they always use propaganda, their distorted education, that the enemy is your neighbour, the enemy is a person of a certain faith or a certain colour or a certain social background. Your enemy is them. But education makes you realise your enemy is those who suppress free speech around the world. So we almost must use education as a liberator, not to allow those who propagandise the educational system for their own personal ideological gains. So within global education, we want to reach out to the world in a positive way, not in a colonialesque, ridiculous way, but to empower people to be critical thinkers, to question those who don't want to be questioned. And having the privilege of having 2 young boys live with me and a Ukrainian mum, I've learnt so much, and it's humbling. And to hear their daily horror stories about members of their extended family or being killed is horrifying. The world has always been at war, but the world doesn't always have to be at war. And if we are in a small part able to change the narrative, hold those who distort education and use it for propaganda to account, then let it be so. And if we can empower people in Sri Lanka or in Singapore or in the UK or in France or wherever else we've got partners, that's part of our broader mission to positively give opportunities, but also change that narrative and create a better narrative. And the world is at war, Sonali, but does it always have to be? I'd argue with education, information, and appropriate questioning. And as Professor Ebrahim said, that you don't need to be challenging to have a challenging conversation. You don't need to be challenging in an aggressive manner. We can disagree appropriately and remain friends. And education gives us that opportunity. And it defeats the propagandist narrative that you are my enemy because your shoes are one colour and my shoes are... It's just stupid ideology based on oppression. And education gives opportunity. And at Wolverhampton, we're very proud to be a university of opportunity and humbled that we have the opportunity to make that message globally.
Qualitative education cannot be a luxury product. Both of you have spoken about how growing up university education was a privilege. How have your lived realities shaped your worldview of mainstreaming education in an equitable manner? How must this be done? Education must not be a tool of elitism. It has to be a tool that empowers. Professor?
Yeah, I mean, I've already described the fact that for me education was liberating, given my own background and where I am now. So you're absolutely right. You know, education has to be available to as many people as possible. I say that in that way because, of course, as you get up to higher education and certainly to university education, then university education isn't for everyone, you know, and therefore, you know, I always work on the basis that when it comes to University of Wolverhampton course, anybody that can benefit from it, has the potential to benefit from it, and would like to benefit from it, we would like to give them access, you know, so that's really, really important. And the other thing is with education, of course, and university education in particular, for communities that typically don't go to universities, it's a bit of an alien concept.
Sure.
You know, it's something that happens down there. So we have to give all our communities the confidence that university education is for them. If they want to do it, you know, come and take advantage. But we shouldn't take that for granted. You know, so as a university, we do quite a lot of outreach work, and that means that we have teams of staff that go into primary schools and work with small children, and into secondary schools and work with children there. And we bring those children into the university. These are children from communities that typically won't go to university.
Right.
And we make them feel comfortable in that kind of university environment, and we kind of more or less are trying to raise their aspirations to say, you know, in the future, in 5-10 years time, this could be you, you know, and don't let anything get in the way, you know, don't set, you know, because sometimes we are our own worst enemy, aren't we? We you know, we talk about glass ceilings and the fact that there are structures that prevent progress for certain groups, you know, and we know that has been the case for women. We know that's been the case for people from global majority of people with disabilities. But we can also reinforce those glass ceilings personally, you know. So there's something about actually giving people the confidence that education and university education is for them. And then there's something about when people come into university, we then make sure we help them navigate, because they are complex organisations. So, I mean, from my perspective, absolutely, you know, university should be they should be democratised. There should be wide access. We should make reasonable adjustments for people who need reasonable adjustments. If you have a disability, for example, physical disability, if you have a mental learning disability, you're on the autism spectrum, then, you know, we have to adapt the way we do things to make sure everybody has a chance to succeed. And I genuinely believe the more people engage in education, and when you think about developing countries, just getting all the children to have a right to basic education, but then to kind of a secondary education, and then from there, the more people engage in a university education or a higher education or a technical education, that can only be a good thing. Education can only be a good thing in the end, I think.
Dr. Carey.
I think, I mean, although I look like the perfect English gentleman, I'm certainly not. My mother worked in a care home, and my father held the lowest rank in the British Army, and then he became a factory worker and died young. And that sort of background does not give you confidence in yourself. You have a number of different factors. People that you grew up with don't want you to achieve. Who do you think you are? You're too good for us now, are you? You're trying to achieve. And those people in a higher social strata want to push you down. Don't come up here. This is for us. So I think having a tough working class upbringing gives you a sense of reality. And what I always find is troublesome is that imagine how many Einsteins there are that never got the education. Imagine how many Marie Curies there are who never got the education. If we are to develop as a world, we must give everybody the opportunity to maximise themselves, because that way we maximise what we are as people within the world. So I think having that working class ethos of hard work, but also, am I good enough? And being told you're not good enough, makes you have that grit and makes you give that fight. But I'm also incredibly aware that there's huge amounts of people globally from perhaps poorer communities that don't have the financial ability to consider themselves good enough for education, that we have to give them the confidence, have to give them the opportunities, regardless of their abilities or disabilities, wherever they may be in the world. So let's create more Einsteins and Marie Curies.
Fantastic. My final question, Professor, your academic background is in public policy and policy analysis. Given that education plays a pivotal role in shaping societies, what is the role of government in becoming a key stakeholder in prioritizing inclusive educational policies and practices to create a more just and equitable world?
Yeah, I mean, it's essential, isn't it? You know, in a way, you can link this back to your earlier question around kind of the structures piece here, you know, and what we expect governments to do is to try and create opportunities for their society to be able to develop and access education. You know, that inevitably therefore requires governments to be active in terms of taxation, because it's only with a tax base that you can then provide a free education to children. So, I mean, governments have a lot to do in terms of making sure that there is a sufficient funding for a level of education that everybody gets a degree of entitlement to. I think within that then, in terms of your point around inclusive education, it's an important one, because not every child, of for that matter every student, is going to be able to succeed without some further help and support. So, you know, governments, if they are genuinely can make education inclusive, will then have to do that bit extra in terms of extra support. For example, as I made the point, you know, if you come from a background where you have a learning disability or a physical disability, then clearly what that requires is the level of specialism, level of extra support that only can come if governments are prepared to put some financial support behind it. So I think governments have a very active role to play in this space, you know, in terms of creating a policy environment and then actually making sure there is funding to provide the right level of support for compulsory education.
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much, Professor Ebrahim Adia, Vice-Chancellor, University of Wolverhampton, and Dr. Robin Carey, Head of International Partnerships. It was fantastic to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next week. Good night.